Welcome back to my latest batch of Laserdisc pickups. This time it's much more of just random commons and not really anything too rare or anything, but just some interesting stuff that popped up locally and other places that I accumulated. And I figured I'd get out this video before it got really, really long. So without further ado, off to Laserland. So up first is the lone music disc I picked up. And I just picked it up because it was in the bins and dirt cheap. And since music discs are so highly collectible, I was like, well, and it's actually worth a decent amount. I think on the database, it's about a $20 disc actually. But this is the greatest hits slash video collection of Bananarama. And it has the lovely old school picture of a disc jacket, which is very reminiscent of an image jacket. And of course, it's still when they were using the CD video logo. And it does have a nice PCM track, but this pretty much goes hand in hand. I think this also came out on VHS tape back in the day. But I just picked it up on a sheer whim because it was literally like 50 cents and it's a music LD. And anytime I come across one and it's got a digital soundtrack or it's a band I particularly like, I'll pick it up just for a whim. So this was just a complete blind buy simply because I don't come across too many music discs in used shops, especially. It's usually that stuff's going to immediately go online and go towards music LD collectors. Next up are a couple of sequels. This one was a real surprise. It's actually quite not common, and it's still in the shrink wrap. Unfortunately, it's a pan and scan copy, but this is the original Orion release with a PCM track of Robocop II. So this is Orion, courtesy of Image. So you have their lovely colored banner across the top, and it's a pretty good looking jacket, even though it's very simple. I'm surprised we didn't get the usual Image LD mock-up picture on the back, but it looks pretty cool, and it's in the shrink, so it's in really great shape. And again, unfortunately, this copy is not widescreen, but it does have the original Dolby Stereo track, and the rear looks pretty good. So I'm going to spin this up and just check out the transfer, but of course, nowadays you have a pretty good Blu-ray from MGM, but without original audio. And then Shout Factory took the same transfer, but put the original audio on there and some extras and stuff. I'm not really big on the RoboCop sequels, but I was planning on rewatching them anyway after looking at the beautiful Arrow release of the original film. So this was a total surprise and was just mixed in with a bunch of commons I found locally. So this was like 50 cents and in immaculate shape. So of course I was taking it home with me. And the other sequel is one I wanted to pick up to so I could have the companion piece to all my Jurassic Park discs. So this is the standard release of The Lost World, widescreen with AC3. This is the point at which Universal had finally decided to get on the Dolby Digital bandwagon. So, in addition to having a PCM stereo surround like most Universal discs, this actually has AC3. You can indicate that it's a later pressing, besides the film, of course, being from '97, by the fact that it has the later widescreen banner Universal switched to using this really thin one, and the Universal logo itself is the newer late '90s variant. There's no gatefold, and it's the thin sleeve with multiple discs inside. So it's actually a really good condition jacket because it's very easy to get jackets like these really dinged up because you have a bunch of discs sliding around, and the first thing to go is the corners. So I was really happy with the shape of this. It's got the THX stamp of approval. Again, it has ProLogic PCM and Dolby Digital AC3. Of course, there is a DTS version that will cost you an arm and a leg. This is actually, I believe this disc came out late '97, early '98, so I would consider it a late release. And I'm interested. So I would consider it a late release since this disc came out late '97, early '98. And I'm really interested to see what the transfer looks like because anytime I can check out anything from the last 3 to 4 years, I'm always excited to see what it's going to look like. Spread across 3 sides, and it does have a little bit of behind the scenes. It's a featurette, basically. Of course, nowhere near the amount of stuff that's going to be on the DVD or Blu-ray, but it is a really cool title to pick up, and it's surprisingly pretty cheap. So I was just holding out for a super cheap local copy like this. This basically cost me $1, so I was very happy to find it in this shape. So if you're looking for a nice later release disc with a pretty aggressive soundtrack, this seems to be a good one to go for because you can pick it up for pretty cheap. So moving on to the rest of these going chronologically, We start with a real classic from 1938. So this is the MGM UA release of Boystown. And of course, pretty much just like all of the rest of their releases, they'll use stills and colorize them and play around with the color. And it looks pretty good, although I wish they would have just left it black and white. And of course, it's designed for VHS dimensions, as you can tell. It is unfortunately price clipped, but otherwise it's perfect shape. Has a PCM mono track, and as you guys well know, that's my main draw for picking up Hollywood classics on Laserdisc. Plus, I always like seeing, the transfers that are really good, but of certain materials that are not pristine and not cleaned up. So you get cue changeovers and occasional blips and tears and such. And basically, they just pulled a vault element off the shelf and transferred it to disc. And I love seeing stuff like that. It does include the original trailer at the end, which is nice, and it's a pretty good rear jacket, even though it's before MGM really started sprucing up their jacket layouts. But it looks pretty good, and I'm interested to see what the transfer looks like. Next up from 1967, this is the Warner Brothers release of the Peter Sellers comedy The Bobo. And I actually passed this up several times. I never realized it was actually widescreen. I thought it was a pan and scan copy, like most of the Sellers comedies and most Warner releases of the time being these very stealthy widescreen disc. So the front cover doesn't indicate it, but it actually does so on the back. And so I passed this up many times, came across this one again, and it's in pretty nice shape. And then I happened to notice on the back that it is indeed a widescreen pressing. And then I was like, oh, wow, I'm an idiot. So this is widescreen. It does have a PCM mono track, and I'm interested to see what the transfer looks like. There's so many Peter Sellers comedies, particularly from the 60s, but into the early to mid 70s, outside of the Pink Panther films, that they all kind of seem to get lumped together, and it's very easy to mix up a lot of them. But I've been meaning to get back into more of them and see the ones I haven't seen, because there are some real gems in there, and there are some really interesting ones, and then there's some real misfires. But he was such a comic genius and interesting presence on screen that there's not really a wasted moment even in the misfires. So I'll be interested to check this one out. This next one I had no real reason for picking up other than it was in great shape and it was super cheap. So from 1979, this is the remake of Dracula, and this, of course, is the infamous director recolored version, because the original concept was to photograph in black and white, but Universal wouldn't let them. So all these years later, they went back when making this particular master and desaturated the color levels. The original release was extremely colorful. And so from this point onward, all the way until the brand new Shout Factory release, we were stuck with this desaturated version of the 1979 Dracula. And so if you want to see the original full color version, that is finally now available via Shout Factory and their Scream label. And they actually are presenting both versions. So you can see this desaturated version, which is director John Badham's preferred way to see it, or the original 1979 full color version. So that's something fans have wanted for years and years and years. So I always stayed away from picking this up on disc. I'm not really a big fan of this particular version, but I do love some of the actors in it, and it does have a lot of wonderful production design lavished on it. So I know this copy is the desaturated version, and I know that's not the way to see it. I would much prefer to see the full color version. So I might pick up that Scream Factory release if they have a sale or something, just to have it and take a look at it. But this is a really nice jacket from Universal, I have to say, and it was, 50 cents. So it's like, well, I'll just pick this up too. It does have the original Dolby Stereo soundtrack as PCM. Of course, no AC3 or anything. This is just a plain Universal disc. No extra features outside of the theatrical trailer, and I don't think it really says anything on here about the color. Yeah, I don't think this says anything about the color and the new timing of this master. So everybody, I guess, bought this back in the day and was just like, wait, what's going on? And that must be what started all of the fan outcries. But anyway, just be aware if you do pick this up or any other version besides the Scream Factory release, you're going to have to deal with the desaturated version that started here. This next one was a surprising find in the local bins. It's actually pretty difficult to get a hold of, and it's one that it seems everybody wants to get, regardless of this being an earlier open matted version. So, this, of course, from 1988, is the Warner Brothers release of Beetlejuice. Now, this one's harder to get. This is it's still the same original pressing, so it's open matted with a Dolby Stereo PCM track, but this is the one that actually prints the full cover. Most copies have the big Warner Brothers silver bar here on the side, so you get it all slotted over here and get that lovely old school Warner silver slapped on it. So this gives you the whole cover. Looks really, really nice. It's got a little bit of crinkling in the corners because, of course, it's Warner Brothers, and they always usually cheap out on their cardboard and cardstock. So when a disc gets this old, if it's just been, thrown around stores and put on shelves and stuff, it's going to get some crinkling and creasing somewhere. So it's got a little bit down here, but it's not too bad. And like I said, it's much harder to get this version with the full cover. Of course, there is a much later AC3 reissue pressing that is widescreen. That's a lot rarer. It's going to cost you a lot more. And it's difficult to pick that one apart because it's exactly the same cover as this printed all the way across. So every time you see a copy, you have to actually check the catalog number or check the rear and make sure it is the AC3 widescreen version. So the rear, of course, is the standard Warner Brothers style, but it looks really good. I like it when they just stuck with a plain black background. It looks really good for the general Warner Brothers style. I love it when they stick with a plain black background like this, and then it goes well with the silver, and the stills chosen are pretty good. Again, it's just the movie only, no special features, but it does have the original Dolby Stereo soundtrack, which I don't think is available on the Blu-ray. I think it's just a 5.1 remix, but the Blu-ray and DVDs have a couple nice extras, so this would be one to have on both formats. But yeah, basically, if you're looking for Beetlejuice, it's still kind of harder to get to this original pressing, even though it is not widescreen, because everybody likes this movie and they want to get a copy on Laserdisc. So you may have to pay a little bit more in terms of dollar value just to get a copy. But of course, definitely try and get the AC3 reissue if you can, because that's a pretty late release as well. Next up from 1990, this is a total blind buy and a title that apparently is not on DVD. So this is an HBO film, or a film made for HBO apparently, called Third Degree Burn. The reason why I picked it up, I like the actors in it, but it is directed by Roger Spottiswoode, and I'm on a quest to see everything made by a original Bond director outside of the Bond series. So of course, Spottiswoode directed Tomorrow Never Dies. He's probably most famous for being Sam Peckinpah's editor for a number of years. So I'll be interested to check this out, and the reviews online all seem to be pretty good, a lot of positive fan reviews, but apparently this is only available on VHS or this Laserdisc. Unfortunately, there's no digital track, it's just analog, and I don't think this is surround encoded. I'm pretty sure it's just plain mono or stereo, because there's no Dolby indicator on here. So it should be a pretty good pressing, and of course it'll be a lot better visually than the VHS tape, but then sometimes VHS with its hi-fi tracks can outdo LD analog tracks. So anyway, that's just the fun of comparing VHS to LD releases. But anyway, this is just one of these interesting little forgotten about films that just has not made it to DVD. So I was like, well, I'll just pick this up. I've been making my way through the director careers of Bond directors. Also from 1990, this is a super common disc, but I picked it up because it was literally a quarter and I had problems. So this is the original standard image release of Total Recall. Amazing condition for the cover, still in the shrink wrap and everything, and judging by this price sticker, it must be the same person who owned the Robocop II, because I picked them up from the same store. So I really love the cover. It's a version of the original poster, and of course I have the later THX stamped remastered widescrreen version, which is definitely the one to go for because of the aspect ratio. There is also the widescreen version of this original pressing. So there are two flavors. You get this original one in 133 or widescreen, and then you can get the THX remastered version in widescreen or 133. But anyway, it's a really great condition cover. You don't really have to have both versions in terms of the original and the remaster. If you have one or the other, you should be pretty good. It has the Dolby Stereo track in PCM. So yeah, and it's a really great, super common LD title, one probably everybody should own at some point because it's like an LD standby. But this is just another flavor of it and a really great condition cover. So again, it was a quarter, so of course I was gonna buy it. Next up from 1992, this was a really surprising find. This is from HBO Video as well. This is the release of the Rutger Hauer picture Split Second, which I've always seen trailers of. I've seen clips of, but I've never seen the whole thing. And I know it's got a quite a cult following, and I've been really wanting to go back and see all the Rutger Hauer films that I've never gotten around to. So this is apparently a pretty uncommon LD. I'm sure it had a smaller print run because it is a HBO Video release. It does have a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, but unfortunately it's not letterboxed. It's a 133 transfer. I'm sure this was probably 185. I may be wrong, but I don't think it was scope because I think this was obviously a smaller budgeted production. But I've wanted to see this, and like I said, I've known about it for quite some time, just never gotten around to seeing it. And yeah, apparently this LD is definitely harder to come by, and I'm sure a lot of people have it on their want list. So this was a real find in the local bins. So I'll be excited to check this out. I just wish it was actually widescreen. But sometimes these open matted transfers, they can, as long if they're done right, they can be really, really good. It's very easy to misframe an open mat transfer, and sometimes just by a little bit. But if you don't realize it, that can really throw off your viewing experience because it's not done just right. So it's losing too much information, particularly on the sides. So anyway, I'll be spinning this up pretty soon and checking it out. Next up from 93 is the Warner Brothers pressing of Grumpy Old Men. And by this point, they were actually printing the widescreen banner actually on the jacket, which is great. And they've switched to making it a nice glossy jacket. So it looks really nice, feels great in the hand, can be a nice display piece. I loved it when they switched over to this because it's not just a glossy jacket, it's a really particularly thick gloss on all mid to late 90s Warner Brothers jackets. Of course, it does have a little bit of corner crumpling and such, but that's going to be pretty much common with anything from Warner Brothers, regardless of era. It's just the movie only, no real special features, but the jacket looks pretty good. And this is one of those pictures, along with its sequel. It's nice to go back and revisit every once in a while, simply for the lead pairing of Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. It's got a Dolby digital. Sorry, it's got a Dolby Surround track as PCM. No AC3. I don't think this film came out with AC3 theatrically, even though it is 93. It may have. I'm not for sure, but the sequel did. Of course, it's very confusing because this disc seems to be fine, but I believe it's the sequel that has all the rot issues. So you should be pretty good on picking up this film on Laserdisc, but it's going to be the sequel, Grumpier Old Men. That's a real rotter title. So, of course, these are available on DVD in a double feature set and also on Blu-ray in a double feature set. So it's very easy to grab those, but this is a nice pressing, and it's, relatively common, so I definitely think it's worth a spin on LD. Next up is a super common LD I see all the time. I just never picked it up. This is the Richard Attenborough picture, Shadowlands. And again, it's via HBO Home Video, and the cover is really, really nice, actually. Like I said, I seem to have come across this a lot. It is letterbox with a Dolby Surround PCM track. I just haven't picked it up before because usually every time I find it, the cover's shot. So you can see it's just multiple discs crammed into a non-gatefold sleeve. So this copy was in really great shape, and again, it was only a quarter. So I'm like, really fantastic drama with Anthony Hopkins for a quarter, of course. And I've seen chunks of this, I know, many times over the years on cable and other places. So I know kind of what it's about, kind of what it's like. I've just never sat through the whole thing. So anyway, this will be a fun way to watch it on LD, and I'm sure the transfers should be pretty solid. And again, it seems like a good pressing to pick up, and it is super, super common, so you can probably get this for less than $1 like I did. I don't know why. I see this one all the time. It's not quite up there with, Forrest Gump and Speed and others, but I know it's one of the more common discs I've seen just looking around in used boxes of Laserdiscs. Next up from 94 is a Michael Keaton vehicle. This is the MGM letterbox pressing of Speechless, which I pretty much picked up because I'm a huge Michael Keaton fan. And this is also interesting because it's one of those confusing MGM discs that has the DTS stereo matrixing process on the digital tracks instead of Dolby Surround. And it basically does the same thing. It's just the DTS variant of it. MGM partnered with DTS, particularly in theaters and for theatrical release, and on all their disc transfers in the mid to late 90s. So that's why all of a sudden, if you look at all the DTS Laserdiscs, it's pretty much universal in MGM titles for the most part. And then on a lot of their mid 90s LDs, MGM used the DTS stereo process, and they were about the only ones who did on Laserdisc. Again, it does the same thing. So on your receiver, you'll just engage whatever version of ProLogic or matrixing you have, and it works and does the same thing, but it's just a slightly different process. So DTS could put their own patent on it. The problem is a lot of people will market these or put them on eBay as being DTS discs, as in DTS Laserdisc, which is unfortunately not true. So don't fall for that. But basically, it's just another version of a matrixing process, so it will work exactly the same as Dolby Surround. The jacket looks pretty good, and of course, by this time, MGM was way ahead of everybody else in terms of LD packaging for just standard releases. So MGM's pretty much my favorite studio on Laserdisc. They seem to focus on the format the most. All their pressings are, for the most part, good and solid. There's not a lot of rot issues, and they seem to be usually a cut or several cuts above in terms of transfer and packaging in comparison to the other studios. And of course, looking at my Laserdisc collection, the vast majority of my discs are MGM UA anyway. But I think that's more of simply because they released so many more titles from their library than other people. And we're busy digitizing more and more and more from the Turner library. So anyway, I'm interested to check this out. I've never seen this particular film before, and it looked like a nice way to do it on Laserdisc. Now, next up is a tried and true favorite of LD fans. This has been on the Laserdisc Forever group many, many times, and is a notorious rotter. So this is the 1995 film The Net, pressed by Sony Columbia, which of course means it is a DADC rot show. Some people have gotten lucky and gotten a copy of this film on this U.S. pressing that's watchable. I haven't been able to go through it 100% yet, and I will very soon just to see. I bought this as a curiosity simply because everybody likes to watch this film now because it's horrendously out of date in sort of a very humorous way. But also because this Laserdisc is such a known rotter, it's fun sometimes to see with stuff like this or The Fugitive, for example, to see if you get a clean copy or you can make it all the way through. Same thing with Eraser as well in particular. So again, this was super cheap and the cover's perfect. Of course, unfortunately, it's mostly filled up with critical blurbs, so they didn't do that too often on Laserdisc, but this is an example where they did, unfortunately, to the detriment of the art. And of course, this is already sized for VHS and DVD. You can pick this up on DVD for like 99 cents, which, if this is completely rotted, I probably will just to watch through it because I haven't seen this in years. Unfortunately, the only other problem with this is there's no AC3. It's just a Dolby Surround PCM track. You do get some nice liner notes, and like most Columbia discs, they're actual liner notes. It's not just a little blurb. It's a little bit small because they cram in a lot of detail. But what's kind of cute is they sort of go for this 90s technical font to look like font on a computer screen. So that's something I kind of found amusing. So yeah, these liner notes are pretty much the only sort of extras you're going to get here. It's just the movie only on two sides. But it does have a nice chapter breakdown. So I'm just curious to see if I can make it through, if this is a rot-free copy by some remote chance. I just picked this up on a whim, to be honest. I'm just curious if by some strange remote chance this happens to be rot-free or watchable all the way through without defects. And the jacket's in really great shape, and it was only a quarter because it's a super common title, and it is almost always going to be a rot-tastic copy. So anyway, if you really want to see this film, this is probably not the way to do it. I do believe there is a Japanese pressing out there that should be okay in terms of rot, but your best bet, I'm sure it's available on streaming platforms, but you can check it out on DVD for super, super cheap with 5.1. And there's also a Blu-ray, which I think came out on the Sony BDR line, so it's manufactured on demand. So if you really want this film in HD, it's out there, but keep in mind it's just a burned Blu-ray disc. Now, next up is a film I never quite realized was as late as it is. It's from 1996. This is the Warner Brothers release of Absolute Power. Again, nice glossy jacket, a little bit dinged up here and there, but not bad, especially since it's multiple discs crammed in here and the corners are not destroyed, so that's pretty cool. And there's not any ring wear, so I can live with it. Of course, they're actually indicating that it's widescreen, which is great. This is an underrated thriller. It kind of follows much in the footsteps of In the Line of Fire as one of the successful 1990s thrillers starring Clint Eastwood. Of course, Wolfgang Petersen did In the Line of Fire, and this is actually directed by Eastwood himself. I'm interested to see what this looks like because this is a 96 film, 97 disc, late era Warner Brothers, so it's three sides with their so it's on three sides with their rear cover design template of the mid to late 90s. It has a Dolby Surround PCM track, and it does have AC3 as well, so I haven't seen this in a number of years, so I'll be really interested to fire this up with the AC3. And it's actually a pretty common, non-expensive disc, so if you're looking for a really good, solid film, later era with a good transfer and AC3 to test out your demodulator or to bulk up your AC3 collection, this seems like a really great choice. Also from 96, and also similarly related in terms to AC3, this is the standard universal release of Dragonheart with this lovely cover. Of course, the Signature Collection box set is the one with all the extras and with AC3 and stuff, so that's the one to go for. This is just a really nice jacket, and it was super cheap and perfect shape, so I picked it up. And stupid me thought it had AC3 on it, but it unfortunately does not. Even though this is the much more modern style of universal jacket, and they were starting to use AC3 by this point, and did on the Signature Collection box, this does not have AC3. It is unfortunately ProLogic only. It still has the THX stamp. It's going to be the same transfer as the Signature box, just without all the extras. So I'm just curious to see what the transfer looks like because I don't have the box set. So I'll check this out and spin it up, but I just wish it had AC3 to really give that, discrete workout. Of course, you can get the original DVD, which is pretty much a port of the Signature box with AC3 and all the extras and such. There's also a DTS Laserdisc that is crazy rare, very expensive. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And of course, there's the Blu-ray as well, which I believe has a pretty decent transfer. I'm not a super huge fan of this film. I remember seeing it on the original theatrical release and maybe once or twice since then, so I do want to revisit it, but I'll probably also pick up one of the other releases so I can check it out in actual discrete surround. But this is just a nice jacket, a nice looking copy. Curious most of all to check out all the early CG work in here and see what it looks like on Laserdisc, because I know some shots are really dodgy, especially today, because it was so CGI heavy in the mid-90s. And then last is one I've wanted to pick up simply because of the cover, also from 1996. This is the Fox pressing of That Thing You Do. Widescreen with the THX seal of approval. It's just it's a fun little movie that I remember. I actually saw this on the original release, and I've seen it a number of times since. The cover is really, really cute, and probably the best reason to pick this up on Laser, besides being a fan of it. It's got a little corner crumpling, but it's not bad. And Fox did, at times like this, make really nice covers. Usually they're kind of more on the generic side unless it's one of their classic discs. But by this point in the mid to late 90s, they were putting some more creative work into their covers. Fortunately, unlike Dragonheart, this actually does have its AC3 track, which you can see here. And actually, interestingly, it has the gold Dolby Digital logo on the back really big, so you can actually see it's got AC3. It's also got a Dolby Surround encoded digital track, and it doesn't really have any extras on it, and it's just a single CLV disc, but you get some decent liner notes, and again, the cover is really fun. I do believe there are maybe one or two extras on the DVD, and there is a Blu-ray as well, but this should be a fun way to watch it, and I'm curious to check out the AC3 track and the ProLogic track, because I always try and compare those two tracks when I'm watching an LD with AC3. And because this film is all about a admittedly fictitious band, but it's all about music, I figured it'd be most important to compare the soundtracks and see how they compare versus when you compare the discrete versus the matrixed. So yeah, it'd be interesting to revisit this. And again, it's just a really great cover. You can't really go wrong, and it does have the AC3 track as well. Well, that does it for laser pickups for the time being, and probably for some time with everything that's going on. I just wanted to go ahead and get this out so I could have be updated as my current collection, since picking around local shops and buying stuff online is definitely going to have to be curtailed for a while. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this, saw some interesting stuff to pick up for your own collections, or rediscover some old favorites to throw on and put in the watch pile. So as always, thanks for watching, everybody.